Good afternoon, everyone. This is Evelyn, today's board clerk. Thank you all for joining us today for day one of the Board of Environmental Safety meeting. Again, my name is Evelyn. I'm the board specialist and will be your board clerk for today. Today, we are joined by the following Board of Environmental Safety staff persons: Swati Sharma, Executive Officer; Sheena Brooks, Public Outreach Manager; Greg Forrest, our attorney; Linda Ocampo, our Senior Staff Engineer; and our newest team member, Erin Gale, who's a board specialist. I would also like to introduce and thank today's support team, DTSC OEIM staff, who assist with all our technical needs. Jennifer Sanchez and Hazel Alamares. Also, Cal State University Sacramento staff, who assist as our Zoom facilitator and registration, Corin Chopin and Janessa Quintos. From Cal Interpreting and Translation, we're joined by two Spanish interpreters, Aldo Renteria and Leticia Reina. From Cal Recycles AV Services, who are currently live streaming today's meeting, Josh Levesky, Abe Myers, and Joaquin Murrieta. Today's live stream is being streamed and recorded, and by your continued participation is acknowledgement that you are being recorded. Today is May 22nd at 2:02 p.m., and the meeting is now called to order.
Yes, thank you, Evelyn. Will you please call the roll?
Yes, Sushma Bhatia. Here. Ingrid Brostrom. Here. Georgette Gomez.
Here.
Jeannie Rizzo.
Present.
Alexis Strauss-Hacker. All five board members are present and a quorum is established. I will now review some logistical items for this meeting. We are conducting today's meeting in person as well as offering remote options for public participation by phone and Zoom. For those of you joining us on Zoom, I would like to instruct everyone to select their preferred language option so that you will be able to fully participate in today's meeting. To do so, everyone needs to select the interpretation icon on your Zoom toolbar, which is located at the bottom of your screen. Please select your language preference by selecting either English or Spanish. And if you select Spanish, you will be placed in the Spanish interpretation room. Please note, if you do not see the interpretation icon, you may need to update your Zoom application. For participants who have joined in person and would prefer to participate in this meeting in Spanish, we have headsets on our interpreter station located at the back of the room. Please make your way over and a staff person will assist you. For those of you in the room, also due to the building's low internet bandwidth, we ask that you do not connect to the auditorium's Wi-Fi. Please either use your mobile data or a mobile hotspot. Additionally, if you will be following along on Zoom, please ensure that your device's speaker and microphone are muted. If anyone experiences connectivity issues with Zoom, you can call in for either English or Spanish. Shown to you now. The phone numbers are provided on this slide, and they will be provided in the chat. And they're also posted on our website. We will now hear from one of our interpreters to provide these instructions for us in Spanish.
Thank you so much. I was actually not able to be unmuted. Can you hear the interpreter?
Yes, we can hear you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Muy buenas tardes a todos ustedes. Vamos a realizar una prueba de sonido brevemente y vamos a proporcionar servicios de interpretación. Para todos los que nos están acompañando el día de hoy, bienvenidos. En brevedad, usted verá en la parte inferior de su pantalla un icono en forma de un mundo. Presione ese icono del mundo y elija el idioma de su preferencia. En este caso sería español. Una vez que lo haga, si gusta, puede presionar nuevamente para poner el audio en silencio y escuchar solamente la interpretación. Si usted tiene alguna dificultad, tendrá posiblemente que actualizar todo lo que tenga que ver con lo de Zoom. Si tiene algún problema, puede escribirlo en el chat, alzar su mano y con mucho gusto lo apoyaremos. Muchísimas gracias y gracias por estar en esta reunión. Back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aldo. We would also like to thank both Aldo and Leticia, who are interpreting today's meeting for us in Spanish. I will now go over materials and logistics. Beginning with evacuation information, please look around you now and identify 2 exits closest to you. In some cases, an exit may be behind you. In the event of a fire alarm, we are required to evacuate this room. Please take your valuables with you and do not use the elevators. While staff will endeavor to assist you to the nearest exit, you should also know that you may find an exit door by following the ceiling-mounted exit signs. Evacuees will exit down the stairways and out of the building. Should we have to relocate out of the building, please obey all traffic signals and exercise caution crossing the street. For housekeeping items, the restrooms are located by the elevators down the hall. Make a left outside of the auditorium doors and you will see the men's restroom. If you continue past the elevators, you will see the women's restroom on your right-hand side. With the exception of water, food and drinks are not allowed in the auditorium. Agenda times may fluctuate to accommodate agenda items, for you to note that. And meeting materials are available on the registration table located at the back of the auditorium, and they can also be found on our website at bes.dtsc.ca.gov. Closed captions are enabled, and you can move the caption display or turn it off altogether. To protect everyone's virtual space and networks, we will use the Q&A chat function as our chat function to ensure that harmful spam links are not shared with our virtual attendees. The Q&A function will be reserved for those attendees who are experiencing technical difficulties or are unable to make verbal comments. Please clearly state at the beginning of your comment, please read aloud, and a designated staff person will notify me. To ensure that all board members are fully present and focused on today's presentations and discussions, they are not reading or following along in the chat. All participants will remain muted until a Zoom host unmutes them once recognized for comment. The only videos and screens shared will be of the board clerk and presenters. Next slide, please. For how to comment and to participate in today's meeting, we are looking forward to hearing from the public throughout this board meeting and have scheduled times on the agenda to do so. For those that are joining us in person and wish to comment, to prevent a line forming at the podium, please raise your hand and I will call you up individually. For those joining us on Zoom, please raise your virtual hand on your Zoom toolbar or press *9 on your phone. If you have joined the Spanish channel by phone, please wait for the interpreters to provide instructions. I will acknowledge each commenter by first and last name as displayed on Zoom, and I apologize in advance if I mispronounce any names. If you would like to express your comment in writing, you may submit it via email to bes.dtsc.ca.gov. If you're experiencing technical difficulties or are unable to make verbal comments, you may again use the Q&A chat function and type at the beginning of your comment to please read aloud. Please note our public forum for items not on the agenda will be heard tomorrow, May 23rd, during the public forum session. Agenda item number 7 will be held at approximately 1:15 to 1:25. For those that wish to comment during tomorrow's public forum, we strongly encourage you to sign up before midnight tonight using the public forum sign up link, which will be provided to you now in the chat. Sign up is not required, but is strongly recommended. For those that are unable to sign up prior to the cutoff, we have comment cards available, which are located at the registration desk and up here at the podium. Please submit it to either myself, Sheena, or Aaron before public forum opens tomorrow. And during tomorrow's public forum, we will recognize the sign-up list first and then call on those that submitted a comment card in the order that they were received. That concludes the introductory review for today's meeting. I will now hand it over to Chair Rizzo for agenda item number 2.
Great, and good afternoon, everyone, to day 1 of our 2-day May meeting. I want to thank the staff of this Berkeley DTSC office for welcoming us and helping us prepare to have our meeting here. Thank you all for that. These hybrid meetings, which we now have over 50 people who are on Zoom, and those of you who are gathered here, it allows for much more robust public participation, and we really welcome that. So all of you on Zoom, we're really happy you're here with us. It helps us implement the reforms that were envisioned in SB 158 legislation, as well as to provide critical input, not just to the board, but to DTSC team, staff, and the executives of DTSC, Cal EPA, and the governor's office. This is the second meeting of our newest board member, Ingrid Brostrom. For those who didn't get to meet her last time, we welcome her. She was appointed to a 4-year term by Assembly Speaker Rivas, and as many of you know, was very, very active and engaged in the entire reform process. Over the last months, the board has been focused on building our staff who report to our executive officer, Swathi Sharma. And since we last met, we want to welcome Aaron Gale to our team. Aaron, raise your hand. He comes to us from the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation, which is a little scary, but I think it's okay. It's the protection part we're looking for here. He holds a BA in Information Technology Management, and thus he'll be indispensable in helping to facilitate our public meetings and permit appeal hearings. So welcome, Aaron. We expect to onboard more staff before our next meeting in July, and Swathi will update you on that. And that meeting is in Sacramento on July 17th. For the past several months, we've been intensely focused on 2 areas mandated by 158, on the upcoming annual fee setting process and on preparing our first evaluation of the department and its leadership. Both important topics are on our agenda for this 2-day meeting. Today, I want to make note that item number 4 on today's agenda, which was the budget update, is postponed until tomorrow as there's a legislative hearing that the Director of Finance had to attend. So we'll be hearing from Brian Brown and discussing budget update. As you all know, we're just concluding the May revise, and so they're having legislative hearings on that. The learning for us in that is we will never have another board meeting in May when everybody has to focus so much on the budget, but lesson learned. We'll also hear today from our executive officer, Swathi Sharma, on hiring and action items from our March meeting. As you know, at the end of every meeting, we capture the action items and report back to you at the next meeting our responses or activities as a result of those. We'll also be addressing 2 contract items for board consideration and vote. Board member reports will be covered at various points in our 2-day meeting as we're including them in an agenda item that covers that as well. So they're not all separated where appropriate. So an update on Georgette's work on Exide will come during the Exide report. Earlier today, the full board met in closed session with our attorney, Greg Forrest, and the attorneys from the AG's office to discuss pending litigation. And no formal action was taken at that closed session. Moving right on now to the next agenda item, I'd like to introduce our executive officer, Swathi Sharma, to provide us with her report. Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So these are the items I will be presenting for the EO report today. Chair Rizzo already gave an update about hiring, that we have Aaron Gale with us, and we are in the process of hiring for a few other technical positions. So we look forward to growing our team even further, hopefully by the next board meeting. These are the 4 items I will be covering in my report today. Action items from our previous March meeting, a fees update, recap of the 2024 board meeting dates, and as well as a review of board contract funding and a possible action to approve funding for facilitation and interpretation services. Next slide, please. So to follow up on the action items from our March board meeting, we had a request about Button Willow for more community engagement from the board around Button Willow Elk Hills site. As many may recall, Chair Rizzo, as well as our senior staff engineer, Linda Ocampo, visited the Button Willow site as well as met with community members from that site earlier this year. We have plans for all of the board members to continue doing tours and engagement around Button Willow later in the year. We have a number of sites and tours that are scheduled for the board, but Button Willow will be one of them, which they will be touring and meeting with community orgs and members at the latter part of this year. The next item is the BES Hazardous Waste Management Plan Subcommittee. The subcommittee members, Member Bhatia and Member Brostrom, will give a more robust update during the report backs during the board member reports. But two of the action items that were called out at our last board meeting was for board members to report back after the April 16th Hazardous Waste Management Workshop that DTSC held, and to share with board members what they learned and debrief on it. And then to also present their list of recommendations from the Hazardous Waste Management Report. The second action item is incorporated in the DTSC evaluation, which will be the next agenda item that we will discuss. The third action item is for the metrics subcommittee, which is also Member Bhatia and Member Brostrom, to work together to bring a deeper discussion on metrics to the BES May board meeting. And they will be outlining a timeline and give a more robust update on what the plan is for the metrics subcommittee. The next action item was an invitation from KBI, and they invited members to tour their battery recycling center in Anaheim. They requested a meeting with staff regarding fees, and they also said that they were going to send a follow-up email with this information. I have not received an email from KBI yet, so if you are on our board meeting right now, please send an invitation and I can respond back to you. We do have a fees workshop in 2 weeks, which we would welcome to hear from and have stakeholder engagement around fee setting. The fifth action item was around Laytonville. Bradley Angel asked for a meeting with Peggy Huglin and the board. And I did want to remind that Vice Chair Strauss-Hacker previously has met during a phone conversation with Peggy Huglin and had a robust discussion around the concern and the sites in Laytonville. The sixth action item was around Santa Susana, and it was a request from Parents Against Santa Susana to request that BES observe participants at the SSFL Groundwater U meetings. We had Member Brostrom, Senior Staff Engineer Linda Ocampo, and Board Specialist Evelyn Nuno, who attended the various field trips that were organized by DTSC around Santa Susana. And we have another meeting with Member Brostrom with Parents Against Santa Susana coming up in a few weeks. So those are all of the action items from our March board meeting. Next slide, please. Here I would like to outline the fees timeline. In April through June, we are conducting stakeholder engagement and conducting fees workshops. In July, the board will hear a presentation from the fees subcommittee to the full board on their recommendations as it relates to fee rate setting. Throughout August, the board will continue to do stakeholder engagements, will hold workshops, as well as invites one-on-one meetings. In September, actually, there's a correction here. In late August, the board will adopt the fee rate setting through emergency regulation at a board meeting. And then those rates will be set October 1st. Next slide, please. So to recap, we did hold a fees workshop on April 26th. We held it jointly with DTSC. And then we have another fees workshop coming up on May 31st from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., where we will be primarily discussing the fee rate setting process, as well as what information we've already received from DTSC as it relates to fee rate setting. Please check our website for more information and subscribe to our e-list if you would like to hear more about the workshop coming up on May 31st. Next slide, please. And these are our upcoming board meetings. We have one coming up in July in Sacramento, then in late August, in the middle of October, and at the beginning of December. Next slide. So here I would like to talk about board contract funding, and there's a possible action to approve funding for two contracts. One is interpretation services, and the second is for facilitation for board meetings. Next slide, please.
She was going to do board discussion before that. Is that wrong? Keep going. I'm just following the script.
Okay. The first contract is board contract funding interpretation services. So CAL interpretation and translation. Contract allows the board to fulfill the statutory and legal requirements for translation, interpretive, and transcription services. This is a request to add $100,000 to the existing contract and to extend the contract till June, the end of June of 2026. Next slide, please. The next contract is for facilitation and is with CSU Sacramento. And this contract provides support to the board for meeting logistics, design, and facilitation support. And this request is to add $154,410.80 to extend the contract also till the end of June of 2026. And I will stop there and welcome any questions from the board.
I do want to note for those in attendance that all board members have received a copy of the contract extensions, so should have reviewed those prior to any vote on it. And I assume you all have. They're essentially amended to extend, so it's not like a whole new beginning contract, but any other discussion on any of the topics that that the executive officer raised. We'll see how efficient you are, that
okay.
everyone feels so well prepared, we don't even have to discuss it.
I don't have questions, but you need a motion?
We do need a motion to, and we should do them one by each.
Yeah.
So we need a motion to amend the CSU Sacramento contract,
For the facility.
CSUS for facilitation.
The first one is facilitation.
The first one's facilitation.
With CIT, CAL interpretation and translations.
Is the second one, right? Which one do you want first?
Let's do CAL interpretation and
CAL
translation.
interpretation and translation. Why don't we do that one first?
Could you go back one slide, please?
Actually, we're going to do public comment first and then go into the vote.
Any
before.
board discussion on this? Do we have a motion?
I think we're opening it up for public comment before we get into
Okay.
motion.
Fine. I can't hear what you're saying.
I'm sorry, just a quick correction. So we have, we're entertaining public comment first for the executive officer report first, and then we'll go into the vote.
Okay.
So I will now open the floor for public comment for agenda item number 3, executive officer report. We ask that your comment be no longer than 3 minutes. If you anticipate that your comment will be longer and would like to request time extension for the board chair, please do so at the start of your comment. For your convenience, we will see a timer located on the screen, and you will hear a chime sound when there are 30 seconds remaining and another melody when your 3 minutes are up. We will also use timing cue cards for your convenience and will alert you when your time is up. The time allotted will be doubled for participants expressing their comment in Spanish to allow for translation. And if you're commenting in Spanish, please let us know at the start of your comment. I will start with commenters in person. Is there anyone that would like to comment on the executive officer report? Seeing none, I will now take comments from our Zoom participants. Please raise your hand or press *9 on your phone if you'd like to comment on the executive officer report. Also seeing none, I'll ask the Spanish interpreters to notify me if we have any comments from the Spanish line. No comments from the Spanish line either. So I will now hand it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So now we're back to the contract. And the first one is the interpreter contract for extended interpretation. We have a motion
Happy to make a motion to move it forward.
okay, is there a second for that? Thank you. Board discussion. The only thing I want to raise is that this contract doesn't guarantee the spending of $100,000. It allows us to spend up to $100,000.
Mm-hmm.
I raise it in this particular area because I know there's interest on the part of the governor, and we've been hearing a lot more about the possibility of using AI in some new way for translation and for some items. So we'll keep that in mind. Something will eventually come down to us, but this contract doesn't mean we've committed the $100,000. It means we can spend up to $100,000 over the course of the next year plus. So I just wanted to make that. 2 years, right. Any other discussion on the interpreter and translation contract? Can we have a vote? Evelyn?
Yes, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the amended contract for CSU Sacramento, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None in opposition. Any abstentions? Okay, the ayes have it to pass the motion for amending the contract for CSU Sacramento.
And for the second item, the board contract for logistics, design, facilitation support. Excuse me, let me repeat. And for the second item, the board contract for logistics, design, and facilitation support to add $154,410.80 and to extend up to June 30th of 2026. I move the board support that increase and extension.
Any board discussion? We've clearly benefited from having the advantage of the support from CSUS on our, so that we can conduct these hybrid meetings and have maximum public engagement. So I think it's, we can call for the vote if there's no further board discussion or public comment.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. We have a motion by Vice Chair and a second by Board Member Bhatia. All those in favor of approving the amended contract for CSU Sacramento, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the ayes have it. The motion passes unanimously for the contract for calendar interpreting and translations. Madam Chair?
Great, thank you. Thank you, Evelyn. And again, as you know, we're postponing the budget update until tomorrow. So for those of you who were relying on that coming next, that will be on tomorrow's agenda, which will be jam-packed and fun-filled as we add that to our long day tomorrow. But that means we have a little shorter day today. And right now, we'll hear from board members for agenda item, which is now number 4, the Department of Toxic Substances Control evaluation. Alexis Hacker will lead that discussion, and after the board's presentation, the board members will each present on one of the priority areas. Alexis will explain that. We'll then have public comment. We'll take a vote on the next steps for that evaluation. And then our vice chair will close out the item. Our vice chair is Alexis Strauss-Hacker with some remarks and ideas about how we might go about the performance evaluation going forward, lessons learned, and how we can improve on that process. So I want to introduce Vice Chair Alexis Strauss-Hacker, who's taken the lead on overseeing this process. Thank you. And I want to just give you my eternal gratitude for that, as the rest of the board, I'm sure, do as well.
Well, thank you, Chair Rizzo. And I want to extend our welcome to everyone participating both here in person and remotely. Today marks a very important milestone as we seek to fulfill our responsibility to evaluate the performance of the Department of Toxic Substances Control and its leadership as mandated by Senate Bill 158. This evaluation is based on the director's priorities set for the calendar year 2023. The director's objectives were initially outlined in January 2023 and were refined a few months later at this board's request to give greater emphasis to community engagement. These objectives have been the foundation of our assessment and describe our collective efforts to ensure safer communities from an environmental and public health point of view throughout California. I wanted to give emphasis for a moment as we discuss the evaluation we have based on the director's 2023 priorities document, that the scope of DTSC's programs and operations is far greater. And the priorities document is a distillation of those foremost in Director Williams' leadership of the department. Over the past year, Director Williams, who is with us in person, has led the department through myriad challenges, demonstrating a commitment to organizational strength and integrity. While notable progress has been made across various initiatives, we all acknowledge that some remain ongoing and certain goals have not yet been fully realized. However, through diligence and perseverance, valuable lessons have been learned and course corrections continue to be made. In our more detailed evaluation, we examined each of the 12 priorities, assessing what was intended for calendar year 2023, what was achieved with the associated metrics and results. And where appropriate, we've made recommendations for this year, reflecting our commitment to continuous improvement, accountability, transparency, and effective public service. We look forward to receiving public comments today and your written comments in the month-long public comment period to follow. We welcome insights on how we can improve our evaluation for the next annual cycle. And as a board, we will now provide a concise summary of our evaluations. I'm going to call on each board member in turn. So we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you.
Can I just make one comment to add to that? The entire 15-page evaluation is on our website. It's available to you here. What you'll be hearing are basically the most cogent parts or priority parts as we saw them to reflect in our narrative. You can read the entire document. You can respond to the entire document. Thank you.
Thank you. So the first priority in the document reflects improving equity and enforcement activities. And there were 4 main metrics. The first one was to achieve 90% compliance at permitted facilities, and this metric was met. Achieve 80% compliance at all facilities in vulnerable communities, and this metric was met and exceeded. The third was to include environmental justice principles in DTSC enforcement staff training. The training curriculum is in development, and therefore this metric has not yet been met. And lastly, to consider penalties assessed at facilities in vulnerable communities, and the revised penalty regulations with the environmental justice criteria are not yet finalized. Next slide, please. The recommendation that we're providing is that the compliance and enforcement metrics could be more clear to identify return to compliance timing and overall levels of compliance across the various regulated entities, so that we might then be able to approach comparing compliance investments in environmental justice communities versus other communities statewide. And we also recommended that DTSC publish an updated list each quarter of inspections completed to increase awareness and transparency. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn to Board Member Brostrom for priority 2.
So for priority 2, which is implementing the Cleanup in Vulnerable Communities initiative, there was one metrics identified, but it was not due this year. So by June 2026, increased by 20%, the annual acres cleared in vulnerable communities. And since that metrics was to be measured in 2026, that certainly was not measured this year and is in progress. The other two metrics were a bit undefined and were kind of identified as future metrics. They were address community groups issues. Again, that metrics hasn't yet been defined in terms of what that means. So again, we weren't really able to evaluate that, as well as the metrics on reflecting community input and success in addressing their issues. I think this will come up a little bit in the section we have on the ECRG program, where there was some movement on this. But in general, across the whole 6 programs within CVCI, this again will be something that we'll figure out how to measure in the future. Next slide. So in terms of some of the board recommendations, again, I want to start by saying there are 6 discrete programs within CVCI, and each of them had a slightly different purpose. And so we looked at each of those 6, and a lot of these are about asking for more information about each of these so that we can better measure their success. So the board would benefit from the establishment of additional criteria and metrics for each CVCI program area to better assess this program in the future. For the discovery and enforcement, the board would benefit from a summary of the findings of the phase 1 ESAs, and this is for the dry cleaners, the number and locations of sites where follow-up activities will be conducted, and the anticipated timeline and community engagement activities for sites requiring follow-up investigation or remediation. So this is regarding the program that looked at the dry cleaner sites in vulnerable communities in California. Next slide. Next, it would be helpful for the board to know how many D&E petitions DTSC has received and how it responded to those petitions. This is regarding a complaint process that DTSC has initiated that allows stakeholders and the public to petition DTSC for investigation. So just having some information on the outcomes of those petitions, how many it has received, and whether there's been responses. Next, the board recommends that DTSC update the board on progress and plans with the Workforce Development Program. Next, the board would benefit from a summary of the number of applications received and granted under the TAG program. This is the Technical Assistance Program. And then finally, DTSC should provide an update on the development of its CBA policy. So again, we would just really appreciate more information on all 6 of the different program areas in the future.
Next slide, please. The third priority was to create and implement a system to identify cumulative impacts in communities. And of these metrics, the first was the intent to host a workshop on revisions to the SB 673 framework. That metric has not yet been met. Secondly, was to analyze cumulative impacts in the very significant Kettleman City and Buttonwillow permits with community input. The draft permit decision for the Kettleman Hills Class 1 facility was issued last month and is out and being circulated publicly. And Buttonwillow will no doubt follow later in the year. Lastly, to initiate the North Richmond community pilot to look at cumulative impacts in a partnership between DTSC and the US Environmental Protection Agency. The first community meeting was held in March. So all of these things were envisioned for 2023 and are being realized in 2024. Next slide, please. Two of us as board members, Ingrid and I, are going to work closely with DTSC's SB 673 team. This year, we've already met once, and we will be updating the board in a public session as may be appropriate. The board will track progress on the North Richmond Cumulative Impacts Pilot and how those resources can be focused to achieve a useful outcome. The board will track public engagement with DTSC regarding the draft Kettleman Hills Facility Hazardous Waste Permit, which, as I noted, was issued last month. And we will consider how DTSC meets the intent of SB 673 in these and other permitting decisions in vulnerable communities, pending adoption of the Track 2 regulations. Next slide, please. Priority 4 is to strengthen regulatory oversight of metal shredder facilities. Of the 3 intended metrics, DTSC was to process 2 permit applications and is presently reviewing the permit applications for the Radius Recycling and SIMS facilities. DTSC intended to initiate rulemaking in calendar year 2023, but did not initiate this rulemaking last year. And lastly, DTSC was to inspect 4 metal shredder facilities and exceeded this goal by inspecting 6 of the 9 metal shredder facilities in California. Next slide, please. The recommendation was that we would, and tomorrow we shall, host presentations on the metal shredder topic with presentations from DTSC, representing the multi-agency task force of US EPA, DTSC, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and the Regional Water Quality Control Board. We will have a presentation from the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project and from one of the metal shredder facilities, Radius Recycling, and they will make a presentation during tomorrow's meeting. We recommend that the DTSC provide us with an update on development of the metal shredder regulation, on the 2 pending permits under review, and what will be accomplished in this sector in 2024. Next slide, please. And I'm turning to Georgette.
So I worked on priority 5, which is the racial equity framework, which is to create a diverse, inclusive organization. There were 3 metrics that were established. One was to release the framework in calendar year Q1 in a dashboard with metrics in calendar year Q2. That was achieved. The second one was to request the partnership of BES to develop the survey and tools, which was also achieved. And then the third one was to work with communities and environmental groups to finalize the Environmental Justice Advisory Council framework and to recruit members. That objective was not achieved in 2023. The recommendation, next slide. The recommendation from us was to, we recommend an extension and continue investment in the EJAC, being that we're moving slower than expected. So hopefully this year we'll be able to launch.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Use the microphone. Chair Rizzo will address the 6th priority to adopt best practices for community engagement. Next slide, please.
Thank you. And again, the priorities had objectives and then particular points under each objective. So if you read the 15-page report, you'll see much more in depth on this and all of the topics that we've been talking about. So the priority for the department was to collaborate with the board, the EJAC, and communities to develop and implement best practices for community engagement and to improve feedback systems and metrics for tracking and responding to public feedback. DTSC adopted and implemented new approaches for X-side, Ecobat, and PTI permits, and the Berg Metals Labrick Hotline. Stakeholder engagement reports at all Board of Environmental Safety meetings. And the Office of Environmental Equity reinstituted its communities of practice. Knowing that there was transition and change in that group, it's reinstituted, and we're looking forward to more robust engagement around that. Overall progress was hampered without an established EJAC. Collaboration with the board and community did result in meaningful progress in 2024. We want to acknowledge that 2023 didn't achieve it, but the dogged effort continued into 2024. Next slide. We recommend that the department work with the board representatives to develop metrics on measurable, timely reporting on community engagement outcomes in 2024 and report out at our board meetings on the results of surveys, actions taken, and community responses. We're looking for a greater degree of transparency that can be communicated here at board meetings, where we tend to have a fair and robust amount of community engagement. So we're looking for that to be part of regular reporting. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Chair Rizzo has priority 7.
So the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant Program, the objective and priorities were to collaborate with community-based organizations to create metrics that align activities with community expectations in order to improve the impacts the impacts on environmental inequity. Round 1, $75.4 million was awarded. The majority of it went to housing projects. The program took a 6-month pause as a result of feedback from and collaboration with stakeholders who felt that there was an overemphasis on developers and not enough from community originated and generated projects. So what happened after that 6-month pause was the grant guidelines were updated to better meet the community expectations for what is now round 2. That was round 1 of the grants. We're now in round 2. A treatment technology council was created to explore alternative remediation treatments and improve approaches to cleanup and community involvement. Next slide. The recommendation is that DTSC reprise the model for round 2. In other words, go back and evaluate round 2 again. Go back. You evaluated round 1, do the same form of evaluation for round 2, and consider application of this kind of community responsive program assessment and modification to other programs. It worked so well, we could imagine that it could be instituted potentially across other programs. We found it a really useful and productive assessment tool. Thank you.
Next slide. I'm going to move the microphone. Georgette Gomez will address priority 8.
Priority 8 is it's related to Exide, which was to transform engagement for community impacted by Exide. This particular priority didn't set metrics when it was created, but it was responding to what was happening at the time. So appreciate that. So we kind of, based on some of the conversations that happened related to this, to the issue and the community, attempted to craft some potential references for DTSC, and there are 3 of them: to actively listen and collaborate with community-based organizations, non-governmental organizations, and BES, local and state representatives, and community members to find approaches, tools, and technologies that rebuild community trust in DTSC, oversight of the Exide cleanup, to significantly increase presence and availability in impacted communities with the goal of providing clear and accessible information about how DTSC is conducting cleanup activities and about the past cleanup residual risk to human health and the environment. And then third, to increase awareness of programs and services that address the harm of Exide and its predecessors which have caused the communities, human health, and the environment. Next slide. So some of the recommendations in terms of Exide is concerned is for DTSC to identify a yearly cleanup total. Currently, there was a total by since the beginning to 2023. So hopefully, cutting that more as a yearly total. As well as DTSC's leadership to provide a path forward on cleanup contracts, solicitations, and recommendations, being that the community has been raising issues related to contracts, to see how various entities involved in supporting Exide cleanup are expected to support the community. So that's more on the community relationship. Recommending and clear operating models for all groups involved in the cleanup.
Next
Thank
slide,
you.
please. Next slide, please. The ninth priority was the challenge to reduce continuing permits, hazardous waste facility permits. And of these, the 4 goals were public notice decisions for all hazardous waste facility permits that have been due for reissuance for more than 5 years. And of those 8, 3 were issued. Secondly, to take the universe of facilities whose permits have run for at least 2 years, and of those 6 permit decisions pending, 3 final decisions were issued. Thirdly, to release the violation scoring procedure rule package for comment. This metric was not met. And lastly, to advise all permitted facilities regarding timely applications, and all 10 of those letters for the appropriate period were sent. Next slide, please. So our recommendations are a bit lengthy here. I commend our report to you. During calendar year 2023, our board was not aware of the timeline for issuing a draft SB 673 Track 1 rulemaking, which would revise the violation scoring procedure. And thus we recommend this be developed and implemented as soon as possible to allow for uniform application in the permit development process. We will ask BTSC to present information at a future board meeting on how Track 2 community vulnerability and cumulative impacts are being considered in current permit development to further the intent of SB 673. Thirdly, our board will continue to work with DTSC to inform you, the public, of draft and final permit decision-making dates, and encourages the department to hold hybrid public meetings for the most prominent draft permit decisions. We will continue to work with DTSC and hope to understand the adequacy of permit division staffing sufficient to eliminate the permit backlog and maintain a steady state of current hazardous waste facility permits. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn this over to Board Member Bhatia for priority number 10.
Thank you. As most of you know, the hazardous waste management report was released last November after some initial delays related to approvals. Now, leading up to this report and since then, DTSC held about 6 workshops to bring stakeholders or to get stakeholders to understand the complexity of hazardous waste management data and the data gaps. Since the report, we've been continuing to work with the hazardous waste management plan team on specific recommendations. I'm going to lay out those 5 recommendations here. And the goal here is to continue to work with DTSC to ensure that these recommendations are incorporated in the plan that is due next year. The very first recommendation is to continue to address the data gaps and ensure that there's a high fidelity in the data. Very specifically, we asked DTSC to investigate if a landfill study might help fill some of the data gaps we see with hazardous waste management data. Secondly, we also asked DTSC to find ways to harmonize the various data sources, since the management report surfaced issues in harmonizing various databases and the metrics used by various databases. Second recommendation was related to enforcement. We would ultimately like to see a significant increase in compliance rates, starting with serial violators. So we've asked to see if DTSC's enforcement division can coordinate with the hazardous waste management plan team to evaluate tiered penalties or other mechanisms that might help drive up compliance and would also reflect in the hazardous waste management plan data. Next slide. Okay. Third, we asked about a source reduction program. There have been versions of pollution prevention programs that existed in the past. We asked to see if a new version of a source reduction program could be stood up that would focus on the top categories of hazardous waste that was being surfaced through the hazardous waste management report. Fourth recommendation is research and development. This is to ensure that as a state, we continue to ensure that the latest science is being incorporated within the hazardous waste management of within California. So specifically, we talked about establishing an initiative that might include academics in California to provide the latest information on innovative technologies. We also talked about mechanisms to allow generators of hazardous waste within California to perhaps pilot certain approaches with the state. Number 5, hazardous waste leadership. We asked that through the course of the plan development, that the team continue to surface for us opportunities where we can lean in as a board to make broader policy interventions for areas that are beyond the purview of the department. Back to you, Alexis. Next slide.
Board Member Prosper.
All right. So priority number 11, this was for the Santa Susana Field Laboratory CEQA process. So again, wanting to remind folks that the priorities that we analyzed were the ones developed by DTSC, and this priority was specific to the CEQA process. So the priority was to publish the PEIR for certification in March of 2023. And in fact, the PEIR was certified on July 19th, 2023. We recommend that DTSC develop and implement a robust community engagement process moving forward. And also for the board, just reminding folks that there is a separate process that we will be undertaking to develop performance metrics in addition to DTSC. So this is really specific to the CEQA process.
Thank you. Next slide, please. You want to pass it? Board Member Bhatia will address the strategic plan.
All right. So we have not seen a strategic plan refresh from DTSC. So a lot of the comments and recommendations that you will hear are based off of the strategic plan that is publicly available. This is the 2020 to 24 strategic plan. And starting with our first recommendation, our very first recommendation is, before I get into the recommendations, there's one more point, which is that the strategic plan is, in these recommendations, we also looked at the KPI dashboard or the metrics dashboard, which is intended to track DTSC's progress on the strategic plan itself. So some of the recommendations reference the KPI dashboard. So our first recommendation is to make the strategic plan a consumable document that lays out what DTSC's planned activities are within their core programs and provide specific metrics tied to the core programs. That's our first recommendation. The second recommendation, as Alexis mentioned and was referenced throughout the course of the earlier evaluation points, there are some areas referenced in the strategic plan that have not been fully realized. So specifically, I think we heard about SB 673. So again, we would like to see DTSC fulfill all of the prioritized actions laid out in the strategic plan and the priorities document. Next slide. The third one is related to the KPI dashboard. Today, the KPI dashboard provides a series of metrics that are tied to the strategic plan. There are also a series of outputs that the department generates. They are not necessarily tied to DTSC's core programs. So as we, as a metrics subcommittee, work closely with DTSC, we'd like there to be a more close tie-in of those metrics with DTSC's core program. And we'd also like to figure out a way to focus on the metrics that matter to stakeholders. So through the course of the board meeting, you'll hear another update from the metrics subcommittee about the work that's already underway and some of the goals we have. We believe that work will set us on a path to refresh the KPI dashboard. Next slide.
We're about to turn to public comment. I wanted to thank my board members for all their hard work in getting us to this point. We look forward to hearing public comment. I'd like to turn it over to our board clerk, Evelyn Nuno.
Would the board chair like to make a comment about receiving public feedback for the
So
EVA?
we have public comments and board discussion, both of those
Okay.
have to happen.
I'll move on with, I'll open public comment for agenda item number 4, DTSC evaluation. I will go first to the hands on Zoom. Please raise your hand or press *9 on your phone if you'd like to comment on the DTSC evaluation. Seeing none on Zoom, I will go to in person. Are there any hands that would like to comment on the evaluation? Okay, seeing none. Any comments on the Spanish interpretation channel? I see a confirmation that there are no comments at this moment. So I will go to the Q&A. We have one person or two people that would like to comment. One from Eric Nolan from Stewarding Design LLC. In cases where objectives are not due yet, is there a way to provide more detail in the progress toward the goal rather than reporting as not available or in progress?
I would like to take that, and then I can refer that question also to the director. But over the course of every board meeting, the progress on those priorities are reported. We will have a discussion at the end of this segment to talk about how we will look at next year and the iterative process of looking at things, because we did hear progress on priorities every single board meeting. So that was iterative. It may not have satisfied everyone's questions, and we certainly would like specific, if Eric, if you have any specific areas that you didn't hear that over the course of the monthly updates by the director, please let us know. Love to hear that.
And maybe,
Ingrid?
and I think the reference was to this priority 2, which called for an increase by 20% in annual acres cleared in vulnerable communities. And I think one issue we had with, maybe creating a status report is that we're wrong. We are using 2023 as the benchmark. And so at this point, and if you look at our evaluation online, you'll see, what our benchmark is in terms of the annual acres cleared. And so that's what we're going to be measuring in the future. But I think even next year, we will be able to see whether there's been an increase there. But just for this year, it was very difficult because we had to use the starting year as the benchmark.
Thank you for that. Any other board member want to respond to that? Any other thoughts? Okay.
Okay, and I have one more comment on the Q&A. from an anonymous participant, I wonder if the community members at large understand what what BES means by KPIs and KPI dashboards.
That's a really good one. We are all guilty of overuse of acronyms. So let this serve to remind all of us to not use all those acronyms that we've come to memorize. Thank you.
Yes, and I'm going to now explain what KPI is. KPI stands for Key Performance Indicator. It's another word that's intended to mean metrics, measurement metrics. So point taken, we'll try not to reference acronyms in the future.
Thank you.
No, I don't see any, there are no hands on Zoom, and that was the last Q&A question. So that concludes public comment for agenda item number 4, DTSC evaluation. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Other board discussion before we go into recommendations going forward? Yes, Ingrid?
This is more maybe process oriented about the public comment process now. And I think we heard that we were going to.
I was going to discuss that.
Okay, I will hold it.
Let
Right.
me recap.
Why don't you do that, and then we'll go back and see if there are any more questions after that. Thank you.
Available online and with each of the board members is the agenda packet with the entire evaluation. I encourage folks to visit that document online and thank everyone for their participation leading up to this point. You may wish to submit a written comment regarding the evaluation, and for that reason, we are going to make available a 30-day public comment period, and whatever written comments we may receive, we will append to this document and post those on our board website. At this point, Madam Chair, if you would like more discussion of this item or to move to a motion, whatever you wish.
If the board has no further discussion on this item, then we'll move to your motion. And at that point, during the discussion about the motion, we will hear from the director as well.
After I talk about the next cycle.
That's right.
Okay.
Can I just ask, I don't know if the next cycle is, are we having a discussion of kind of like some of the process?
How we're going to
That
do
we-
it next time.
Yes, okay, just wanted to make
Yeah,
sure.
after the motion.
Okay,
So I'm going to try and close out the process for the 2023 evaluation. And then I'm going to invite comment on how we should approach the next evaluation. And then I'm going to turn to DTSC Director Williams for her comments. All right, Madam Chair, I move that this board receive public comments over the next 30 days and then transmit the final evaluation to the Secretary of Cal EPA with the public comments included in an addendum to the evaluation.
Do we have a second for that motion?
I can second.
So for full transparency, I think it's important to know that the evaluation was presented to the director. It was presented to the Secretary of Cal EPA. What we're doing now is adding to that what we're hearing now, what we're hearing in terms of public comment and to that. So it's providing an opportunity to augment the report. SB 158 requires the board to transmit, I think the word is transmit, to the secretary our evaluation. And it was, I would say, well received, complimented for its thoroughness. And we said we would come back and explain how we will approach the next evaluation process. So I just wanted everyone to understand that we're talking about adding public comment to the document, which will live on our website, as well as go to the director of DTSC and to the Secretary of Cal EPA. Thank you.
Okay, and now we'll take a voice vote. So we have a motion and a second by Member Bhatia. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none. Any abstentions? Okay, the ayes have it and the motion passes. I will now hand it back over to Vice Chair Strauss-Hacker for her conclusion and remarks on how the board is considering our approach for next year's performance eval.
I'd like to invite my board members' thoughts on how we tackle the next evaluation within mere seconds of completing the first evaluation. First, and I think this is more of a, I would like us to better align with DTSC and other state agencies' fiscal year, so that in as much as Director Williams' priorities were that we based this on were for calendar year 2023, and we're now looking at 2024, I think it makes more sense as we try to count outputs and outcomes, perhaps, that we switch to the state fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2024. It's just around the corner. So let's come back to that. The evaluation would be for 1 year from July 1st to June 30th of 2025. Secondly, I would suggest, and this is just to generate your discussion, that we look at the director's 2024 priorities document and determine which of those priorities the board has the ability and the mandate under SB 158 to cover. There are more things happening in DTSC than the board has oversight for. And so if there is neither a SB 158 board mandate nor investment, given our size, we should be clear about what we will cover in the next evaluation. And then thirdly, we can begin to build this content for the next evaluation starting on day one. We could divide up those priorities among the 5 of us and determine who will take the lead and work with our BES executive officer and staff to begin to archive content at every board meeting and throughout the year, so that we are not trying to pull this together at the end of the cycle, but are continuously building the evaluation throughout the year. So those are among the suggestions I have, but I just wanted to use those to kick off a discussion among us about how to tackle the next one, and then to turn it over to Director Williams.
So board members, Sushma?
Oh. I like that that measurement is a continuous process and it's not just a moment in time snapshot. So I really like to see us implement this in a meaningful way. The second thing I will add, personally for me, this was a little bit challenging, given that I was looking at this from a metrics angle. I find that the strategic plan, the KPI dashboard, or the metric dashboard, and the priority document seem somewhat disconnected from each other. If there's a way to tie them together and make them what I call consumable and tied to DTSC's core programs, it'll be one single document we reference moving forward to assess DTSC's overall performance.
Well, that's a challenge. Okay. Who is next, Georgette?
Yeah, I too agree and support everything that has been stated. I think a couple of things in addition to what was stated. I also think that even if we are changing to line up the fiscal year, which I think it makes sense because that's the way the metrics are laid out and the goals are laid out. So that was really challenging when we're evaluating the way at least this one is for the year of 2023. And the information that we were looking at doesn't line up. So difficult to do. Definitely supportive of that. Having said that, I also think that even the dashboard that DTSC has, the goals are either for that calendar year or multiple years. So it really has to be kind of like, it's got to be per calendar year. So for fiscal year, fiscal year. So I think that's a request, and I know it's perhaps challenging, but I think it's worth trying to figure that out, just because then this particular evaluation is going to be very difficult to continue moving forward with. Strongly recommend us setting up the structure at the beginning, and then having the ability to capture information as it's being shared with us versus at the back end. And it was structured the way that it was, but I think we can set it up earlier. And I also think in reflection to where all the board members are appointed by different levels of legislation that can change, right? We had a change. So I think perhaps internally we need to figure out how do we capture that, the notes that they can carry, they can carry to whomever's here and they can pick up, right? So having that infrastructure internally is really important as well. What else? And lining it up between the dashboard, the metrics, as we're developing our own metrics, how do we line it up with that as well? How do we line it up to the strategic plan? So I do believe too, like that whole lineup needs to happen, because right now it's not there yet. So perhaps in a couple of years, but we can set the tone, right? So yeah.
Thank you. Ingrid?
Yeah, I think that last point is what I was going to say, which is at our last board meeting, we adopted the director's priorities with the caveat that we wanted to take a deeper look at how the interrelationship between the director's priorities and our own metrics. And also we have these other metrics and dashboards. So I think that's still on the table.
Yes.
And I think by moving to a fiscal year, maybe that gives us a little bit more time to be thoughtful about how we're going to, take these, I think at this point, 4 different potential, indicators, and make it make sense. So I think we need to take a little bit more time, and we're going to talk about, I think, kind of our movement on the performance metrics piece of this a little later, maybe tomorrow. But yeah, so I definitely agree with moving to fiscal. And then I think we really need to think deeply about the way that makes sense to align all 4 potential matrices.
Sushma, you have more?
I want to talk a little bit about the second point that Alexis made, which was about the fact that not every topic within the strategic plan or the priorities are areas we are deeply covering because we're mandated or we have a subcommittee against it. I do see that there's some value in reporting out on those metrics, and that perhaps we acknowledge that those areas we're simply reporting out on metrics submitted by DTSC, but we don't have deep recommendations because we have not engaged deeply with them. But then we still cover the metrics, but there's value in providing a holistic view of what DTSC is accomplishing in the year.
And to add to that, there's a couple of things. One, I want the subcommittee, as you work on it, to address what do we do with January through June 2024? How do we roll that in to then what would essentially be a year and a half? And how do we not have it take us 4 months at the end of it to do the evaluation? That's one. The second thing is, when you look at our mandates, there are some very global ones, like evaluating the programs, right? Well, that could cover anything that was in those priorities. So we haven't really unpacked that. Some of the priorities are within programs, or maybe, say, for example, last year, consumer products wasn't a priority because they were working on the 10-year and about to work on the plan. It might be in this one, right? One could say it's an important program. Are we going to not address it because 158 didn't call out consumer products? I think that would be a mistake on our part to ignore. The priorities also often speak to where there's great community concern. And so when we hear from community members, because part of our job is to represent the public and to represent vulnerable communities, that may or may not be either a priority or a mandate, but it's important. It's an important part of our mission as a board and why we're here. So I think as much as we'd like just one set of rules, I think we have to be able to stretch to the realities of what's going on. There may be, very well could be something that wasn't one of her priorities, it wasn't called out in the mandates, but it is a big hot button issue that we ought to be paying attention to and having thoughts and recommendations on. So that's all part of what I think we have to take into account and then decide how we'd roll the first 6 months into it, recognizing that the board had just been stood up almost right at the end of that first fiscal year from when 158 was passed. So there was no way we were doing that year. And then it took us 6 months to figure out how we were going to do it. So we went on the calendar year. This isn't to excuse, it's to explain and understand when we said, okay, what are your priorities? Because we'll focus on those this time, knowing full well that we'd be back here looking at what worked and what didn't and what we couldn't address. So I just want those elements, whatever your recommendations are, great, we'll all hear them and we'll discuss them. But bear in mind that, so for example, SSFL was just a PEIR and the priority. It's a lot hotter than that now and was in 2023 than but we committed to evaluate the priorities. So I want to acknowledge that there were areas that came to our attention that were high priority for Californians, for communities that feel vulnerable to things. So I think we have to have some nimbleness in our ability to add something that comes up, some disaster, something. I don't want us to be so locked in that we ignore issues that are of high concern. So that's my hope to the subcommittee. And then we'll hear from the director as well.
Yeah, just one last point, and that's in reflection to or a reaction to what you just said, Chair. In terms of the nimbleness, I think we have a perfect example, which was at the X side, right? That's it. It became more of a immediacy as time was moving forward, where there was a response from DTSC. There was like a full-on structure that was in response to it. There were various different committees. So I do think that that's going to happen, and definitely think that we should be create that awareness within this whole process of evaluation. So yeah.
And that bears
So it
in
happens.
mind that it affects where the board members spend our time and where our staff spends our time. So when something comes up that becomes consuming, it does take us away. We have 4 part-time board members and we do have a growing staff, but it's really difficult to stay on top of, with maximum 12 people that we will have, to stay on top of what 1,000 people or 1,400 people are doing. I don't know. I'm just having a little bit of a hard time being as deeply knowledgeable as they are on those things. So how we glean and what we ask for in terms of reports and information, I'm really looking to DTSC cooperative spirit in providing that to us, because 12 people can't be where 1,200 are.
I just wanted to kind of look at the reporting structures that we have and the difference. So my understanding, and maybe I get details wrong, but my understanding is this report goes to Cali PA.
Yes.
And the director.
Yes. And it's public.
And the public. So that's different than the annual report to the legislature. And that's different than the performance metrics. And so, even trying to kind of parse that out in terms of how can the utility be maximized if the director priorities are mainly for Yana as well as a public forum. How does that guide some of our decision making and process as opposed to some of these other processes? So, my hope is like, yes, let's try to integrate them as best we can, but also understanding that they may serve different purposes, and maybe, we don't need to, jam them together in a way that doesn't make sense for their intended purpose.
Right. But we have to have done our due diligence before we go before a legislature with recommendations or with assessments, that we haven't spent the kind of time that we did spend on the priorities. So if there are things that we're going to want to hear from the director on a regular basis or a quarterly basis, just like we've asked permitting or enforcement or, whichever department to come before the board. We hear that all the time. That's another way to glean the data that we need, is to pull from those presentations. We tend not to be as, I don't want to use the word directive, but to request specificity about things we might need when we ask for those presentations. We accept the presentations provided us. Sometimes we're more diligent about saying, could you cover this? Could you cover that? I think we can do a better job at that, so that when deputies and teams come to our meetings to report, they're answering to things that we need for either the annual review or for things that we need for the legislature. So it's now just getting in that mindset all the time. And I think Swati does a really good job of that. And I think we could just enhance that even more once we nail down next year's effort. But I want to just thank Alexis for being dogging us for the last several months. We didn't make it easy for her, and I just want to give her kudos. I know I in particular did not, so I want to thank you for your work on that.
Well, I think the credit really belongs with Swati and staff, all of whom worked very hard to get us to the stage here today. And I will be taking up with Swati how we pull together these recommendations. I can't obviously email the 4 board members under Bagley-Keene, but I will work through Swati so that we can pull together and work with DTSC on shaping what the next evaluation looks like.
That's a really good point, and I think everybody should remember that. The 5 of us is the first time we're all talking about it together. So this makes it hard, or a different kind of hard. It's just a challenge to operate. When you're operating as a semi-governance board that you can't all sit with each other all the time, it really puts a lot of pressure on our staff as well. So I join you in thanking them.
Erin.
Louder.
Yeah. Erin, I'm happy to, we've received, the board and staff has received briefings on enforcement, and I know you joined after that, so I'm happy to share those presentations and details with you. Thank you.
That's a good question.
All right, let's call upon DTSC Director Williams.
Thank you for coming to Berkeley.
Berkeley is my second home. I used to work here every Friday. So I'm always happy to be here. Good afternoon. Thank you all very, very much. Salute to Alexis, who of course deferred to the rest of you for all the work that you did to pull the information together. Thanks to all of you. And Alexis noted it, or you noted, I think Alexis noted it as a significant milestone. And I couldn't agree more. Of course it wasn't perfect. It was the first time, but if we take a step back and look at the arc of SB 158 of the reform and what the intention was, the transparency, and this level of transparency, I don't think has ever been part of how the department has worked, where people know what we're working on. They know whether or not we're getting there, right? So it's just, we need to take a step back and recognize that things are working as intended to that extent. And that's something you should all commend yourselves for. And I thank you for helping achieve that outcome. Of many of the items that were, the recommendations are touching on topics that are going to be talked about tomorrow. So you'll get some updates on some of those things. I'm not going to speak to those. There were a couple things during the conversation that I thought I would at least touch lightly on. You may remember my presentation on priorities. I think I showed my pile of laundry. Did I show my pile of laundry? And the point of my pile of laundry was that I chose to go hiking instead of doing my laundry or bird watching. I think it was bird watching. The priorities have to guide the department. They have to help us make decisions about where we're going to put our effort and our energy. They have to give us some kind of direction of, oh, why are we over here? We said we were going to be over here. And so that's to me the most important thing about the priority. And unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily line up perfectly with how to do the evaluation. So we're going to wrestle with that over the next couple of months, and we can figure it out. And that goes to the alignment with programs. Again, it's very funny because there's this expression, are you a lumper or a splitter? And I am a splitter. I like my little compartments. I like them that way. And when it comes to this, there's a lot of value to the lumping because community engagement isn't just about hazardous waste management program. It isn't, it's every single part of the department. Whether that's, our budget shop helping support you in the discussion of the generation and handling fees. It's all of the work that Serlene is driving. It's, giving our project managers on our cleanup sites better skills for engagement. And so there will be some lumping that has to happen, and that's going to make it messy. And I'm just acknowledging that because I can't see the easy way around that. If we want, if we want to serve that kind of larger vision of where the department needs to be. And then the last thing I want to touch on specific is the strategic plan, because you mentioned a refresh. And last year, what we did was we refreshed the existing strategic plan, but we're in the last year of this strategic plan. It's a 5-year strategic. We're not going to refresh it, but we haven't yet decided what's the process for a new strategic plan. How is that going to unfold? We will reflect on what we were able to do under the strategic plan and what we didn't, how it worked, how it didn't work. I will tell you that having a strategic plan with almost 200 individual actions, there's another way to do it. And so I do expect the next year's strategic plan to look a bit different, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to have conversation with you about that. So I did want to clarify that point, just in case that wasn't understood. We welcome the shift to the fiscal year. I think that's a great idea. I know our hazardous waste management program folks are particularly excited because they drive everything that way. And it does give us an opportunity to reconsider or to consider some of the recommendations that you've made, figure out which ones can be incorporated into a revised set of priorities. And I do think that's, it's going to be even better in the next year. And I do want to acknowledge the nimbleness and the importance of nimbleness, because we did add Exide and the community engagement on Exide into our priorities. And I don't think we had any sense of just how much effort that was going to be and how many resources that would take. What we didn't do when we add that was take anything off the table. And we have to acknowledge that, like, this was something that required a lot of, public participation leadership and community engagement leadership that maybe could have been used on some of the other things that we had on our plate. And so we're going to have to be, again, transparent about the impacts of adjusting priorities so that people understand we're happy to commit to this, but it may come out a little different in terms of what's already on the table. So I just wanted to make those few comments. Again, I thank you so much and look forward to the discussion about where we go from here. Thank you.
I think it's fair to acknowledge that there's a lot of collaboration. It was not a top-down, bottom-up, sideways, ignore it, don't bother. And I think over the course of this last year, we have enhanced the collaborative nature of the relationship, which I think is the only way we're going to get it. But on the other hand, we have very unique responsibilities to guide, to push, to ask. And I think I think we can get better at that. And in terms of what we ask for, and I think we are getting better, calling more of the staff to present and having more briefings. So thank you for that. Anything else from Meredith from board?
I just want to acknowledge the comment you made about how challenging it can be to build a consumable strategic plan that both covers the depth of the work you do and then also acknowledges the horizontal layers, which is how you do your work. As part of the metrics subcommittee, both Ingrid and I are really interested in helping shape the strategic plan. So to the extent you can use our help, we're happy to help you think about the what you do versus the how you do it, and how to bring that in a way that the community can sort of understand what DTSC is doing. My second point, I think, is also a critical one that you made, which is a trade-offs point, that you're having to be nimble and make trade-offs as you go along. I think as a board, if we can understand the intentionality behind those decisions, so we can acknowledge, like today, there were a couple of times where we said, hey, DTSC has exceeded certain metrics and certain other areas, DTSC has not met the metric, right? But we're doing this after the fact. Perhaps there's some intentionality to having the conversation during the course of the fiscal year where we say, this work was acknowledged as a priority, but we're going to deprioritize this because this other thing has come up. So that when we do the evaluation, we have a collective understanding that they were intentionally deprioritized.
Thank you.
Well, we look forward to your 2024 priorities discussion tomorrow morning at 9:15. Everybody will be keyed up for this. And I as Chair Rizzo had noted, and so many of your leadership team, including Wayne Lorenzen here in the room, helped us with data points that contributed to the report. And there was so much work done by all of the team here in the room. So thank you so much. Chair Rizzo, I think we're ready to move on to the next agenda item.
Great, thank you, Director. And thank you for all the board and staff work on this. I know it was a heavy lift at times, but we got through it. We got our first one done. Okay, so now we're talking about board member updates. So these are updates that will not be in other parts of the agenda. They're standalones. If there's an agenda item, as I mentioned earlier, like Exide, Georgette will report them. But right now we're looking at 4 updates, and we'll start with Ingrid on SSFL metrics. And then if Evelyn or Lynn, however you want to go with that full report.
Yes, so on May 10th, I attended a site tour of the Santa Susana Field Laboratory with representatives of local and state officials, as well as multiple DTSC staff. And, we were able to visit 7 locations on site, including the Area 1 burn pit cleanup. Also, I have reached out to the Santa Susana Field Parents Against Santa Susana Field Laboratory, and I'm scheduling a meeting to hear directly from.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, anything on metrics, KPIs that you all want to report on? Are you doing that together? Okay.
Okay, I'll kick off and then Ingrid can contribute. So as most of you know, Ingrid and I are part of the metrics subcommittee, and we were excited to finally kick off our metrics workstream. We started by working with Craig and the hazardous waste management program team to deep dive on the metrics related to that specific program. Katie walked us through, and her team walked us through both the org structure and the sub-programs within HWMP, which stands for Hazardous Waste Management Program, as well as the metrics within their program. As a follow-up, we asked that this team provide us a mapping of the metrics against their sub-programs. Ultimately, our goal as part of the subcommittee is to provide a recommendation to the broader board of metrics to consider by the end of the calendar year. I'll let that sink in. By end of the calendar year, provide a perspective on the metrics that we would like to see DTSC adopt and then prioritize for our stakeholder communication. But working backward from that goal, we need to, by end of summer, so within the next 2 months or so, have a full understanding of the metrics that DTSC already has in place. We've already looked at all of the publicly published metrics available through the KPI or the Key Performance Indicator dashboard that's available on DTSC's website. But we understand from DTSC that there's some additional metrics that might be tracked within DTSC. So the goal here is to understand the full holistic landscape of what data already exists and what is being measured within the next 2 or 3 months tops, and then switch over from that point to drive some public engagement and get some inputs on what metrics matter to the stakeholder community. All of this would lead up to the goal of us as a subcommittee bringing recommendations for the board to consider.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add is we're not operating in a vacuum. There's been lots of stakeholders that have offered various perspectives. We had the independent review panel some years ago. We've had legislative reports and audits. And so we're also trying to cross-pollinate like what outside or external stakeholders have suggested should be goals for the department, and look at those in conjunction with those that DTSC has made for itself. And so that's part of our process too, is making sure that we have a good landscape of various things that have been suggested as goals for the board. I mean, for DTSC.
Can I just add to that? I just wanted to make clear that this is specifically for the hazardous waste management program, and then thereafter we will be tackling program by program for the metrics, just so that everybody is.
Yeah, so those are some of we did make some decisions. That was one of them, is that rather than try to come up with metrics for all the programs all at once, that we were going to go program by program, starting with the hazardous waste program. We've also been discussing kind of, at what level do we want the goals to be? Do we want these to be, broader goals from 5 years out, or do we want there to be like some immediacy in terms of the short-term goals? So those have been part of the discussion points too.
Thank you. Is there any additional staff input on other slides? Okay. We've already talked about the evaluation, Alexis. So I think we're good on that.
I'll just add just really quickly that board member Bhatia and myself and a couple of staff members did meet with PG&E to hear some of the concerns that they had around fees and other areas. Member Bhatia, if you would like to add, but just wanted to acknowledge that we did meet with them and received a presentation from them.
Yes. So just to add a little bit more, the conversation with PG&E was about contaminated soil, to be specific. They are concerned about naturally occurring metals and contaminants in soil, and then the fact that certain entities, maybe like PG&E or developers, have to, in the course of development, now discover this contaminated soil and have to take responsibility for safely disposing it off, and then the fees associated with that. So the conversation is about, can there be other mechanisms to dispose this off that would first expedite the treatment, but also would somehow reduce the fees associated with that, in addition to other benefits, some of the other benefits that they perceive?
I would ask, my guess is you're aware of it. Concerns? Okay, so this isn't news for you. Thank you. I didn't think it would be, but I think sometimes it gives us a perspective on how businesses are thinking, but we also always let them know that something's outside of our purview or authority, but we do hear them. And so happy to know. We've already talked about the evaluation. Do you have any other reporting on executive committee work, Alexis?
I do.
Okay.
Board members support our executive officer in first and second round interviews as we seek to build the board to its full level of authorized positions, modest though it may be. And so over the past few months with Chair Rizzo and others, I've participated in some of those interviews, and I'm very glad that we are continuing to build our staff, which allows us to build our capability to do work. And I've also appreciate DTSC giving briefings on the Safer Consumer Products program, which has reached such significant milestones. And as I noted earlier, Ingrid and I have begun working with the department's SB 673 team. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, Georgette, CVCI.
Related to CVCI, Ingrid and I and staff have been setting up various briefings with the team at DTSC with the premise of one of the tasks that we have is creating a deeper dive evaluation on the program, so which is what we're gearing up for. So we just been gathering a bunch of information on that, and we continue to do so. I don't remember the timeline on when we're hoping to have the draft. Okay. Yes, we have a full-on timeline, which I do not recall at the moment. So I'll pass it to
Somebody
staff.
must.
So
Yes.
so this will the aim is to share this with the board at the July board meeting, and then thereafter it needs to be submitted to the legislature. So during the hearing, which is tentatively set in August right now, that we will produce it to the legislature then, but it'll be shared. A draft version of this report will be shared at the July board meeting.
And the alleged hearing is tentatively scheduled for August 6th. For those of you who just can't wait to be there.
Yeah. So the idea is that we share it with the public, the draft document. We'll have a preliminary conversation here with the full board with the intention of getting some feedback, and then finalizing it for when Chair, you're in front of the legislature giving the report, it's finalized then. So that's CVCI.
Okay, so now do we have any ask for public comment on the board member reports?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We will now open the floor for public comment for agenda item number 5, board member reports. I'll ask participants on Zoom to raise their hands or press *9 on their phones if they'd like to comment on this on agenda item number 5. Seeing none. Any in person that would like to comment on board member reports? Okay, seeing none. Any comments on the Spanish channel? Okay, thank you, Aldo, for confirming no comments on the Spanish channel either.
So thank you. I skipped over any further board discussion. I thought we did quite a bit of back and forth. Is there anything else that the board wants to discuss on the reports that you just heard?
Just like how Ingrid's been working with me on CVCI.
We're good? Okay, great. Okay, so now we have 2 sets of board minutes to approve. This is the fun part of the meeting. Alexis always does a really good job of reviewing the minutes. So you've all read them. We all got them in advance. We all spent hours on them.
Madam Chair, is there any board discussion on the minutes that we are putting forward for approval?
No, you all read them. You're all satisfied with them. There were no errors, no misrepresentations of your commitments.
I'm just going
Okay.
to that stage.
So we just need a motion to move on March 20th and 21st. I don't know if we can put them together, or do we do one by each?
You can do it together.
Okay, the March 2021 board meeting.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the minutes of the March 20 and 21st board meeting.
Second from Georgette. Any discussion? Can you call the vote, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. All in favor of approving the March 20 and 2024 board meeting minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. Any opposed? Hearing none, any abstentions? And sounds like the ayes have it. The motion passes to approve March 2021 board meeting minutes.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the May 20th board meeting minutes.
Sorry, we combined them.
March.
No, we did both.
We did both?
We did,
Yeah, we
did
just
March
both.
20 and 21 together. I know, I asked, right. Okay, well, there you go. We've approved both of them. Thank you. Okay, so that concludes our agendas for today, which was truncated because of the moving of the budget update till tomorrow. I want to thank you all and ask if there's any closing comments that anybody wants to make about this meeting or beyond. Did you eat your chocolate? Did you eat your cookie? Did you eat your awakened nuts? Okay. Hearing that we're all taken care of, can we have a motion to adjourn, please?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The meeting is officially adjourned.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The
Start tomorrow.
Oh, yes. What time do we start tomorrow?
9.
9 a.m. promptly.
Thank you, members. The meeting is officially adjourned.